Hello again, welcome to the video for Section 8 of DMA 20 where we're going to talk about adding and subtracting decimals. In this video we'll go over adding decimals, subtracting decimals, then look at addition and subtraction with signed numbers, and then we'll finish up with estimating problems and an application. Next time we'll cover Section 2.9, which is multiplying decimals. To add decimals, write the numbers vertically or up and down, aligning them at the decimal point. Then add 0 placeholders as needed to make all the numbers the same length. And then add the numbers from right to left. And finally, you're going to bring down the decimal point straight down. Now for an example. Here we're going to add 31.913 plus 5.6 plus 68 plus 16.78. Now, let's write them vertically, aligning them at the decimal. So we'll start with 31.913. Then we have 5.6. So we'll do 5.6. See how I aligned them at the decimal there? So the ones place matches up with the ones place, the tenths with the tenths. And now I need to make these numbers the same length by adding 2 zeros. Now we have 68. Remember, this decimal is implied to be after the ones place there, so we'll have 68.3 zeros to make them the same length. And then finally 16.78 with 1 zero to make them all the same length. And we're going to add all 4 of these numbers at the same time. Starting in the rightmost column, 3 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 3. Moving to the right, 1 plus 0 plus 0 plus 8 is 9. Then the third rightmost column, 9 plus 6 is 15, plus 7 is 22, so that's 2, carry the 2. And now I'll start at the top and add this next column. 2 plus 1 is 3. Plus 5 is 8, plus 8 is 16, plus 6 is 22. So that's 2, carry the 2. And now I'll add this last column. 2 plus 3 is 5, plus 6 is 11, plus 1 is 12. And that decimal comes straight down from where it was. So our final answer is 122 and 293 thousandths. To subtract decimals, we're going to use the same rules that we use for addition, except this time we're subtracting. So line up at the decimal, add zeros as needed, and then bring the decimal straight down after you subtract. So this first problem, 279.6 minus 138.71 aligned at the decimal. Now I have to add a 0 to the top number to make them the same length. And right away I run into a problem where I have to borrow. On the rightmost column, I have 0 minus 1. I can't do that, so I'm going to have to borrow from the 6, make that a 5. And now I have 10 here. So I do 10 minus 1 and I get 9. I can't do 5 minus 7, so I have to borrow again. I'll borrow from the left. That becomes an 8. And now I have 15 minus 7, which is 8. I'll go ahead and bring the decimal down now so I don't forget. 8 minus 8 is 0. 7 minus 3 is 4. And then 2 subtract 1 is 1. So here I get 140 and 89 hundredths. Now I'll subtract 13.059 from 15.4. Remember, when I have these problems written out and I have subtract from, I need to switch the order of these two numbers. So the last number comes first, so I'll have 15.4. Subtract 13.059. And then I'll add 2 zeros to make them the same length. And now I'm ready to subtract. I can't do 0 minus 9, so I have to borrow. I go over to the left and I find myself with another 0, which I can't borrow from. So I'm going to have to borrow from this 4. Take one away, that becomes a 3. Remember, the in-between zeros become 9s, and that last 0 becomes a 10. I had 10 to that. But make sure you make those in-between zeros if there's multiple zeros when you're borrowing 9s, and the last one number becomes 10 more than it was. So I do 10 minus 9, and I get 1. 9 minus 5 is 4. 3 minus 0 is 3. I'll bring down my decimal. 5 minus 3 is 2. And then 1 minus 1 is 0. So my final answer here is 2 and 341 thousandths. Now don't forget your sign rules that we learned in DMA 10, because we will be adding and subtracting decimals that have varied signs. So let's look at some examples to refresh ourselves there. Here we have negative 6.1 plus a negative 4.7. I have a double sign here in the middle. I have a positive and a negative. And when I have two different signs, that becomes a negative sign. So when I rewrite this, I'll have negative 6.1 minus 4.7. Okay? The signs are the same here. I have a negative and a negative. When my signs are the same, I need to add and keep the sign. So I'll have 6.1 and 4.7 aligned at the decimal. And I know my answer is going to be negative. So I'll start at the right. 1 plus 7 is 8. Bring down that decimal. And 6 plus 4 is 10. So I get a negative 10.8. Now, in my second example, I have some order of operations that I need to deal with. The first thing that I need to do is what's in the parentheses. So I have negative 14.5 plus 3.8. My signs are different. I have a negative and a positive. And then when we subtract these, I'm going to have to subtract these when the signs are different and keep the sign of the larger number, which is going to be a negative. So I'll start by subtracting those two numbers here to the side. 14.5. Excuse me. And then I'll subtract 3.8. And remember, my sign's going to be negative, so I'll write that in now. I'm going to have to borrow, because I can't do 5 minus 8. This will become a 3, and this will become 15. So 15 minus 8 is 7. Bring down the decimal. 3 minus 3 is 0, and then bring down the 1. So here I have a negative 10.7. I'm going to write that in to my problem. So I have a negative 12.2. Bring down the minus, a negative 10.7. Now, in this problem, I also have a double sign right here, negative and negative. When the signs are the same, that becomes a plus. So rewritten, that looks like negative 12.2 plus 10.7. Again, my signs are different. I've got a negative and a positive. So I'm going to subtract the 2 and keep the sign of the larger number, which is the negative 12.2. So again, off to the side, I have 12.2 minus 10.7, aligned at the decimal. Okay, time to subtract. I'm going to write in that negative sign so I don't forget that my answer will be negative. That was the sign of my big number. Can't do 2 minus 7, so I borrow. This becomes a 1. That'll become a 12. 12 minus 7 is 5. Now I do 1 minus 0, which is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So my final answer here is a negative 1.5. Now let's look at estimating with decimals. We'll see two different types of estimating in this section. Sometimes they'll ask us to estimate to a certain place, and then other times they'll ask us to use a technique called front-end rounding. And we'll examine both of those here now. The first example, they tell us to round to the nearest 10. So that's 10, not tenths. So we'll round to the tens place. 261.76, we're rounding to the tens place here. The 1 is going to make that stay the same, so that'll be 260. So anything that's before the decimal becomes a 0. Everything after the decimal gets dropped off. Here, when we round this second number to the tens place, we're looking at the 3, and the 2 makes that stay the same as well. So we'll get 430. And then we'll simply add those together to get our estimation. We get 690. In our second example, they ask us to estimate by using front-end rounding. And front-end rounding, you always round to the leftmost place. So in this case, it's going to be the hundreds place here and the tens place here. For the first number, we're rounding to the hundreds place. The 8's going to make the 3 go up, so we would round this to 400. And the second number, we've got, we're rounding to the tens place. The 7's going to make that number go up, so we'll go from 5 to 6. We'll estimate that to be 60. And then we'll add those two numbers to get our estimation as 460. So two different types of rounding. One where we're told what place to round to for all numbers, and then front-end rounding where we round to the leftmost place for each number. Lastly, we have an application problem. We need to find the retail price of a suit if a clothing store buys them for $201.95 each and then marks them up $144.95 before selling it. So a markup means that we're adding it to the price that the store paid. So the $201.95 is what the store buys the suit for. They choose how much profit they want to make. That's called the markup. And then the retail price is the two of those added together. So we need to add $201.95 and $144.95 added at, lined up at the decimal. We'll start adding. 5 plus 5 is 10. Then we'll add here. 1 plus 9 is 10, plus 9 is 19. Bring down the decimal. 1 plus 1 plus 4 is 6. 0 plus 4 is 4. And 2 plus 1 is 3. So the retail price for this suit is going to be $346.90. That does it for Section 8. We covered adding and subtracting decimals, and then we reviewed how to add and subtract decimals with signed numbers. Then we looked at two different types of estimation, and then finished with an application problem. In the next video, we'll examine Section 2.9, multiplying decimals.